You're off the Sea God! All three of you!
You picked a wrong day. You started it.
Oh boy. I don't know what is going on right now. I feel like Google, the powers that be, somehow know all of the things that I've said about the Rings of Power, and I'm just constantly getting bombarded with stuff about the show. I am done with it until Season 2 comes out and we get to Round 2. But after seeing this, well, I've got some stuff to say about it. Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, and oh boy, JD Payne, Patrick McKay, Amazon, you guys have really been paying these people to shill out all these different kinds of articles, haven't you? This one right here, this one that just keeps on coming to me no matter what I do, no matter where I go to try to escape it. I've gone into the middle of the wilderness and somehow I have found this title in the dirt. Why is it that they believe that we are going to just eat up this garbage that they have laid the foundation in Season 1, and that in Season 2 is where the real fun begins, when they are finally going to be canonical? You can't go back to the canon at this point. This atrocious fanfiction has gone in such a complete opposite direction of everything that Tolkien stood for and everything that Tolkien wrote, and believe you me, he wrote a lot for the Second Age, actually. We know quite a bit. They've gone so far off the ranch, so far off the rails, this train is burning in a ravine somewhere, that if they were to actually switch back to canon, it would be such an atrocious course correction that what fans there are of the series would suddenly feel abandoned, because going back to canon would be so different from everything we've actually seen in the show thus far. And if they continue on this fanfiction route, they're just going to continuously alienate fans of The Lord of the Rings. So this claim that the fun is about to begin, that the foundations have already been laid, well, I'm sorry, but it's already an absolute train wreck. But let's actually have a look at this claim right here, because I do genuinely believe that we can actually learn something very crucial for writing by analyzing this claim.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
So, if you are going to write a very large series, conventional wisdom states this, that the very first installment in your story should be an absolute standalone tale. Meaning that if you have the first book of a trilogy, or the first book of 7, or the first book of 50, the first book in and of itself should tell an absolutely complete story, that if the rest of the series were to never happen, someone who reads book 1 could finish it, feel content, feel satisfied, put it back onto their shelf, maybe read it again in the future, but that there would never again be a need for another story. Sure, there are plenty of questions, there's still loose plot threads that could lead into other stories yet to be told, and the reader may even want to really know what those stories are, but if they never come, it is still a fulfilling story. However, that conventional wisdom is definitely not something that we see happening a lot anymore in the world of fiction, whether it be writing or making movies or making shows, and I kind of blame that on this whole trilogy concept. There's so many stories these days, especially when it comes to YA fiction, that when they are pitched by the author, the publishers are like, okay, if we're going to pick up your story, this is an investment in time and money for us, we want to make the most, and we want to get the most out of your story. How can you turn it into a trilogy, or into a series of 4 or 5 or 6 or more, depending on how popular it is? Really, it's all about how much money can we make. And so that, because that's now the common fact of the matter, even though the conventional wisdom still stands, if you're to talk to any established author, they will say, no, the first book should be a very strong standalone with enough to tease out the rest of the series, what publishers and what editors and what so many many companies, especially when it comes to making shows and movies, wants, is they want to be able to turn that story into a franchise. And what this has led to rather than having one solid standalone story that then kicks everything else off, rather instead the first book has become just the first chapter in a much larger story, and not everything is resolved by the first book. Instead, there's tons of questions left open, and lots of things are just kind of left within the ether, and the hope is that the audience is curious enough to want to know more, and that the characters were strong enough and the story was strong enough that the audience feels engaged, and they will want the next book in the series. Now, I will say this, as someone who is working on a 6-book series, which is The Legend of the Ten Lords, when I wrote Knights of Halicruz, I understood what the conventional wisdom was. And if you've read any of my stories, I'm a bit of an unconventional storyteller. I kind of go off and do things my own way, and I knew that I was really risking it for the biscuit when I said that, you know what, I am going to leave book 1 on a cliffhanger. Not all of the questions are going to be answered, and it's going to be very obvious that there's going to be a sequel, because holy dang, that ending needs to be resolved. So, obviously now, going into book 2. Book 2 has already been released. I'm right now working on the 3rd book in the series. However, reason why that's a bit of a risk is because, again, you are relying on the fact that the questions are interesting enough to pull the audience in, to want them to know more. The characters and the plot should be engaging enough that people fall in love with the world, fall in love with the characters, fall in love with the plot, and are just along for the ride, and are desperate to see more. They're so excited. But if you can't nail those things down, well, then people might say, well, that was an interesting book. I'm lightly amused, I'm lightly curious, but I don't know if I'll actually pick up the next book in the series. And that's probably where a lot of people feel when it comes to Rings of Power, if we have to go off of the Nielsen numbers or really any other metric of viewership, because it seems like a lot of people dropped off this show halfway through, and it was just diminishing returns ever since. There's a lot of people who aren't going to come back to this series because the characters weren't engaging enough. We just got to look at the Karen Sue that was Galadriel, and really, well, what kinds of mysteries or questions are there? Oh boy, what kind of world building was there? And so really, on those questions, let's think about right here. What foundations have been laid by the Rings of Power? What kinds of characters have been firmly established that we love, that we want to get to know more of them? What kind of world building has just sucked us into the world of Middle-earth during the Second Age? What kinds of questions must be answered, or otherwise I'm going to go insane? Okay, well, let's be honest, or at least I'm going to be honest right here. I like Durin the Fourth, and I like Elrond. Those are 2 characters that I would like to see again. I'd like to see more of them. I'd like to see more of this dynamic between the elves and the dwarves, especially because we got to see nothing of the elves and the dwarves actually building the massive furnace. So I actually want to see that. I don't just want to see a massive furnace and then be told, well, the dwarves have built it. Haha! Oh, that was so aggravating. No, I want to see genuine interactions between elves and dwarves. Give that to me. And I want to see more of Elrond and Durin. Give that to me. That's at least something that I really want to see. However, I don't really care about Halbrand, hot Sauron. I mean, I love Sauron as a villain, but there's nothing compelling about Halbrand in any given way. We were told to rewatch the series. When I look back at it, there's nothing about Halbrand that really now captivates me. Knowing that he's Sauron, I'm like, wow, that just actually takes all the mystery out of it. This could have been a very interesting human lead for the story with a dark past, but no, he's Sauron. And I already know what Sauron's going to do. And I already know how far you've deviated from the canon with Sauron, that it doesn't really matter. And more on that in a little bit. And Galadriel, I love Galadriel as a character, but you turned her into a Karen Sue. She's annoying. She's aggravating. She is honestly the villain of the entire series. It's awful seeing her on screen, and I don't want any more. And what about the leaders of the elves? King Gilgalad is a jerk. I really liked him in the books, but he's a jerk here. I don't want to see any more of him. And what about Celebrimbor? It would have been really interesting to see the Celebrimbor of the books, but no, we don't get to see any of that. We just get to see an old, tired elf who doesn't understand what alloys are? That's really, really bad if you're supposed to be a master metalsmith! And what about the dwarves? I said I really liked Durin the Fourth, and you know what? I actually liked Disa all the way up until the very end when she went crazy-eyed and was basically saying that, without saying it, that they are going to assassinate the king! Now, that might have been interesting if King Durin III was an interesting character, but there's so little of him that I honestly don't care. And what we were shown of the dwarves was D&D dwarves, not Lord of the Rings dwarves. And so all the interesting stuff about Tolkien's dwarves are not there. If you actually want Tolkien-accurate dwarves, I'm sorry to say it, but watch the Hobbit movies. Oh my gosh, that's a horrible thing to say, but if you want Tolkien-accurate dwarves, you have to watch the Hobbit movies or read his books, because what we got in the Rings of Power were D&D dwarves, and we didn't even get enough of them for me to really care about. Moria looked amazing, but we got so little of Moria. We got rooms. We didn't get the massive kingdom. We didn't get to see the dwarves actively creating, actively doing stuff, actively forming or not forming their military, doing something. No, we get them drinking and roaring with laughter as they smash rocks. That is the most that we get of any large dwarven community. Seriously, there's nothing to really get to know about the dwarves. So, okay, I don't really care about the dwarves. Oh, look, Moria came into being. Yay, I didn't really care about that. And you gave me so little of Adar that while I thought he was a very interesting character, I don't know where you're even going to go with him from this point on. Oh, he's going to face off against Sauron. This is one of the original orcs who has no magic and isn't even that great of a fighter, apparently, versus Sauron, a Maiar, the right-hand man to Morgoth. Yeah, I really wonder who's going to win this battle. And ooh, but Adar defeated Sauron at one point. It's a whole bunch of misdirection. It's a lie. It's a mystery box. There is nothing that I feel engaged in as far as Adar and Sauron goes. Adar was an interesting character until you plop Sauron into the middle of it, and Sauron is the big baddie. So I don't really care about Adar. Unless you're going to show that he's really a very wonderful, crafty individual, which I got none of that in Season 1. Okay, and what about the humans? I don't care. I don't care about Bronwyn or her sweaty, meth-addicted son, Theo. They can go off and found Gondor for all I care, with the route that they're going with how they've broken canon. I don't really care. And what about Arondir? You know what? I really wanted good romance between him and Bronwyn, and I got none of that. And I don't really care now about Arondir because this guy doesn't even know how to be a good father to Theo. So, you guys can go off and do your own thing on your little subplot. I don't care. What about the Harfoots? I don't care! Those murderous little hobbitses should go and get strangled and eaten by Gollum. Just get rid of them. They're awful individuals. I don't care. When they were off screen, it was a relief. And now as Nori is going off with Proto-Gandalf, I really don't care! I don't care because I don't know who this Proto-Gandalf is. I don't know why he's got to go off to Rune. It's another mystery box, and it's one that's not engaging because it's going to take us away from all of the action that's happening elsewhere. And I say action in quotation marks. Ooh, what about Elendil? What about what happened to Isildur? Oh, I really wonder what happened to Isildur. It's not like he's going to be important later on. And as far as Elendil goes, you know what? I like the character of Elendil. I really do, but he's gotten so little screen time that I don't feel connected to him in any kind of way. And I know what's going to happen to the Numenorians. And the fact of the matter is that the way that the Numenorians have been set up as a kingdom makes no sense of how we're going to get from where they are right now to the downfall of Numenor. It really doesn't make any sense. What, they're all going to fall apart because, oh, we hate elves, so we're going to turn our backs on them, and then we're going to invade Valinor for whatever dumb reason. It makes no sense with how they've set things up. So, if the characters aren't engaging or aren't interesting and I don't feel connected to them, well, what about the world building? What world building? What was it that caused the great evil to corrupt the tree that happened to corrupt the elves? Who knows? It doesn't matter anymore now because of the strange elven rings, which makes no sense, now apparently stops this evil corruption from spreading, and the elves will be able to hold on to their immortality. None of this was explained. None of this made any sense. It goes completely against canon. It's awful fan fiction. Okay then, and as I've already said, we've seen almost next to nothing of Moria. What have we seen of Linden? What have we seen of Eregion? We have seen rooms and a couple of wide shots. But honestly, if you go back to the Fellowship of the Ring, you spend so much time in Rivendell. You feel like you could actually be there. I don't know what Eregion or Linden are. If anything, they are knockoff versions of Lothlorien. And we got more of Lothlorien in the movies than we do of these elven kingdoms. So I know nothing about these kingdoms. We spent most of our time in Proto-Moria, which has now been blasted, so everything that we got connected to is now gone. The most that we've spent of any other place has been Numenor. And now that could be interesting, except, well, what do we know of Numenor? It's a monarchy with the barest threads of a parliament that doesn't really seem to exist. It doesn't make much sense. Apparently, the monarchy hears petitions from the people. What do these people have to petition about? All of them already know what they're supposed to do according to what their guilds say they're supposed to do. They happen to have a sea guard, but there's no reason for them to have a sea guard. The world building around Numenor doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Why do they care about commerce when they are isolated? It doesn't make any sense. So, thus far, the characters don't really matter so much. The world building doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, what about the plot? Season 1, if we went according to conventional wisdom, has wrapped up a total story, and if it ends right here, we would feel absolutely satisfied, but if we got more, oh, we'd be so happy. What was the story of Season 1? Quite honestly, I can't really say. It was revealed towards the end that, ooh, Season 1 has been all this time about how Moria came into existence, which I didn't care about. The one real follow-through thread throughout the entire story is that Galadriel must confront Sauron, which she did. Hallelujah, Galadriel confronted Sauron. We were looking forward to this. We were going to get a battle. No, Galadriel just simply shuns Sauron's temptations. Oh, away with you, Sauron. And Sauron leaves like a bitter incel. He's like, I will make you love me, Galadriel. Just you wait. Once you use those rings, I'll forge my own ring and I'll be able to control you. Ha ha! That's basically what we're getting right here. And because I don't like Galadriel and I don't really care much about this version of Sauron, I'm not really interested in the fact that this plot line was wrapped up. It was told. Season 1 does tell one concrete story, that Galadriel is hunting for Sauron. She will confront Sauron, which she does, and Galadriel, quote-unquote, wins. So the good guys have won, they manage to get their rings, and Sauron flees to Moria to now rebuild his empire in armies of evil. So we have our setup for Season 2. They've actually followed conventional storytelling wisdom. However, despite the fact that they followed the conventional wisdom, they absolutely sucked at telling a good story. If you want to know how badly they sucked, you can check out my previous 10 videos looking at the Rings of Power Season 1. So, if the first installment, first chapter, first book within a series is supposed to lay the groundwork and help us to get to know the world, get to know the characters, get to know the plot, tell us a concrete standalone story, but set everything up to go onwards, well, while the story in Season 1 has been wrapped up and things are set up now for Season 2 to roll forwards, the problem is that the world building is absolutely lackluster. The characters, for the most part, are awful. The payoff was nonsensical or non-existent, and most of the threads that are left spinning in the air are mystery boxes and stuff that most people honestly don't care about. And as a result, people are not interested in the follow-up season. This claim that all of the foundational work has been done is a load of bogus. Yes, they might feel like they've done the groundwork and everything, but really and truly, if you were to understand who really any of these characters are, like write an essay, not telling me what they've done, but telling me who they are, just based off what you've seen within the series, the only character that you could probably do that for would be Galadriel, and it would not be a flattering report. So, the Rings of Power has absolutely failed to lay a good, solid foundation. It is a foundation, it's a really wibbly wobbly wonky bad one. And I have worked in construction jobs. I know what it's like to lay a foundation, and I've actually seen what happens if you lay a foundation wrong. It gets bad, it starts cracking really, really fast, and it doesn't hold the weight that it's supposed to. And when it doesn't hold the weight that it's supposed to, then the walls start coming down, and if people are living inside the house when the walls start coming down, that's when you get injuries. And that's essentially what's being set up right here. The foundation is bad and already cracking under its own weight, which foundations do that if they are not properly set. If they do not have proper depth, if they are not made with the right materials, if they are not made with the right scaffolding and planning, a foundation will start crumbling almost immediately after the cement has settled. So let's actually look at some stories then that have some really awesome, powerful openings that are basically standalone but still set up things to move forward. One of the very first books that comes to mind, at least for me, is Fablehaven. If Fablehaven had ended with the first book, honestly, that would have been enough, because you have Kendra and Seth going and discovering this magical world in their grandparents' backyard, discovering what the rules are and everything, how contracts, how magic works, how all these different magical creatures operate and communicate with each other, how they're integrated or not integrated, and the rules of the story are very well established already in book 1, that there are consequences to all decisions, and if you do something negative, you will reap negative rewards. Worse the decision, the harder the consequences. The better the decision, the better the consequences. And that is a theme then that is established already in the first book that follows throughout the rest of the stories. There are moments where in the first book you might be wondering, why don't the villains just murder someone? And you learn that if you murder someone in this world, you will reap consequences. That is magically binding. So if I'm going to murder someone, I better be strong enough to face said consequences. And you don't actually meet people who are strong enough to face said consequences until later on in the series. And it's actually a really awesome payoff to something that you just kind of take maybe for granted already in book 1. And while you are introduced to various organizations like the Society of the Evening Star, well, it's not necessarily that important within the first story. It's a really neat thread that can be tugged on later, but by the end of the story, Kendra has saved the day. She has defeated this ultimate demon and the witch who has supported him, and she manages to save her family. If the story ended there and they're like, whoo, I can't wait to go back to Grandma and Grandpa's place next summer, then it would have ended like Gravity Falls, where you're like, that was an amazing story, and I would love to go back next summer, but we probably never will. That's sad, but man, it was such a beautiful ride. But with Fablehaven, we then get a follow-up in the next book, and wow, does the series take off from there. But if it ended with the first book, you would have had a solid, fulfilling story where you understand the world, you understand the characters, and you fall in love with some of them. Or maybe you hate some of them. I really love the fact that you really hate Seth by the beginning and the end of the first book, and by the end of the 5th book, you're like, Seth is the most amazing character in this entire series, because he's given a great redemption arc. But he doesn't need one by the end of book 1, because this is Kendra's story, not Seth's story. At least in book 1, because the rest of the series it's most definitely shared by both Seth and Kendra, which, again, I just really enjoy. I love the Fablehaven series. Another great book that is a great standalone, even though it's absolutely part of a much larger series, is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. If you ended the entire series right there with book 1, yes, it would be disappointing because you want to see where Rand goes now that we know that he is the Dragon Reborn and all of his friends are now going to play some sort of role in what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen just yet. Is Rand going to defy all the odds and get together with Egwene? Because that's what he and Egwene want, even though he's already been told by Min that that's not going to be his fate. And there's this whole thing of, is there choice? Is there fate? What does the Dark One have in store? Was the Dark One actually defeated? What is going to happen with Rand now that he is a male who is channeling the power? Oh, this is going to be fantastic. But if it ended right there with Rand saving the Borderlands, defeating this massive army of Trollocs, and facing off against Châtain, or at least the person he thinks is Châtain, and manages to pull off this amazing victory. It is a beautiful story in and of itself. The heroes are absolutely amazing. You come to love the characters. I loved Perrin in the first book. I didn't so much like Matt in the first book, but I came to really love Matt later on in the series. But I got to know who Matt was in the first book. I loved Rand. I loved Egwene. I loved Nynaeve. I loved all of these amazing characters from the Two Rivers and all of the supporting cast as well. There was a whole lot of great fun in that book. If there was nothing else after that book, I'd be like, oh man, I wish there was more, but I am satisfied, I'm fulfilled with what I've read. That is what you want. You want the audience to be like, wow, that was amazing. Please give me more. Has the Rings of Power actually done that? The answer, according to most people who watched it, is no. People who are sticking around to watching it, for the most part, are there to make fun of it, or to tear into it, or to gain the immense, horrible pleasure of watching Amazon gouge itself of billions of dollars to create horrible fan fiction tripe. There's not many people that I have met, and I do know people who do like the show for what it is, and if they like it, good for them. I'm honestly glad that you enjoy what you enjoy. Far be it from me to force you to watch something that you don't want to watch. I give my recommendations, but if someone doesn't like it, that's absolutely fine. I know that not every story is for every single person. But even with all of that being said, the fact of the matter remains that the Rings of Power has been a billion-dollar flop. Amazon has not made back that money off of the show itself, and the show itself is an absolute travesty. And this claim that has laid the foundation is honestly false. Whatever foundation it has laid is already crumbling and falling apart. Why? Because it's a first draft fan fiction. So with that being said, I really do hope that I stop seeing dumb articles like these. I know I won't because Amazon has already invested well over $1 billion into this project because they don't want it to fail. I love the fact that they were bragging about it being worth $1 billion, and now that it's very clear that's a flop, they're like, no. It's only $467 million. Only $467 million. It's cheaper than Avatar 2. Yeah, no. You guys were bragging about it beforehand. So what is it? Is it $467 million or $1 billion? Because after seeing all of the things that you guys have bragged about and seeing all of the horror stories about stuff that's happened behind the scenes, $467 million, while that definitely does not reflect in the quality of the show, is way less than what we know they've paid, and what they've paid in the consequences for doing all of their awful decisions, and all of the money that they're pouring in to try to keep the hype alive while the hype train is wrecked and burning at the bottom of a deep ravine because they ruined the story so thoroughly. They continue to throw money on the fire, hoping that's going to put the fire out, but they're only fueling the fire further. So like I said, this obviously will not be the last time I talk about Rings of Power. I'm going to be looking at Season 2. I'm kind of committed to it now because I'm just so ticked off at this point. And I definitely want to see how they try to improve after all of the things that they've done to this story, because I don't believe that they can do it. If they manage to pull it off, hallelujah, more power to them. And I also want to see how it compares to War of the Rohirrim. Oh, I am so looking forward to that when it finally comes out. But coming back to it, what can we as novice authors actually learn from this whole debacle? The truth is that the best thing that we can learn is the conventional wisdom. If you are going to write a series, make sure that your first story is a strong standalone, that it has an engaging plot, fantastic characters, great world building, it sucks people in, and it leaves them wanting more, and that you've already set up how more can happen. That is the conventional way of going things. That's probably the safest way to write your story. Now then, if you want to break convention, like what I did, understand this. Number one, it is a huge gamble. It might not pay off. And number two, if you're going to break convention, you have to know what you're breaking so that way you know how best to break it, so that way you can make art out of that seeming disaster, because really you're hoping that it isn't a disaster. You're hoping that you're doing something really awesome and engaging that pulls the audience in. So you have to know exactly what you're doing. If you're going to do something like me and you're going to leave off with a cliffhanger, is that cliffhanger something that complements how much people like the characters? I mean, you won't really know how the general audiences will, but that's why you need beta readers in order to see, okay, what do we like about these characters? What don't we like? Does the plot make sense? Does the world building make sense? Do I honestly want to know more? And one of the things I learned by having my beta readers going over Knights of Halicruise was that a lot of people were actually very interested in one of the other characters, Jessica. Well, they're like, oh yeah, Ben is obviously the main character and it's going to be interesting what happens to him. I really want to know what happens to Jessica. And so that actually empowered me when I went forward with the second book, and I'm like, the second book is going to be more Jessica focused, and now that I know that that's what my beta readers want, obviously I'm going to lean a little bit more into that and give them more of Jessica and her development. And so that made it just a really good experience, writing that story based off of the feedback and hopefully pleasing the audience by giving them what they wanted, while also making sure that I'm writing what I need to write so that way my story is the best that it can be. Oh boy, going against conventional wisdom is a very difficult thing, believe you me. So if you're going to do it, understand the risks that you are undertaking and be ready to pay the price if it doesn't play out the way that you wanted it to. But I would say this is just kind of one more insight. If you are a novice author and you want to write a series, might I suggest first writing a standalone story, not one that's meant to actually become part of a series overall. Write one standalone story first and foremost. I so wish I had done that, rather than just diving headfirst into writing a 6-book series, because I did not yet have the skills or the insight necessary, I think, to really make it the best that it could be. With what I knew and with what skill level I had, I made Knights of Halicruise the best that it could be. But looking back at it now, I could have done way better. It is definitely a stronger step forward to follow that conventional wisdom and do one good standalone story. Alright, so with all of that novice wisdom being said, if you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos here on our YouTube channel. You can also head on over to our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have writing exercises for you to check out over at our Pinterest page, and of course, we would love for you to join our ever-growing community of novice authors. Links for all of our stuff and more are in the description below, and especially if you would like to support us, please check out my newest book, Tumble Teller. There's a link in the description below for you to check out that book. It is an amazing story about a young dragon who wishes to be a performer, a tumble teller, and we get to see her as she goes on her first solo performance and see all of the things that she gets to experience, all the obstacles she has to overcome, and the amazing adventure that she undertakes in order to become a professional tumble teller. So please check all that stuff out, and until the next video, y'all, choose.